US President Donald Trump described his earlier meeting with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as very, very successful. But what are the implications or the possible implications of the meeting? Well, earlier I spoke to investment and currency analyst Jameel Ahmad from FXTM. So, Jameel, what do you see as the significance of this meeting between the US and North Korea and, of course, this signing of a framework that seeks to work towards the process of denuclearization?
Well, I don't think we can downplay the significance of the meeting. This is quite unprecedented, and it's something that, there was doubts into the lead up to the summit over whether it would actually take place. However, it's very significant. This is the first ever sitting US president who's met a North Korean leader. And let's not also forget the recent history between President Trump and the North Korean leader has not always been picture perfect. There has been tensions, and there's been a lot of uncertainty in the financial markets over whether these two could potentially get involved in any conflicts. However, it seems that the meeting went very well. The markets appear to be positive about the meeting. There seems to be quite a positive reaction in the financial markets following the summit, or there might have been muted somewhat as the day progressed. And everybody's positive over the process or the possibility that North Korea will enter a period of denuclearization, which actually will remove a very significant and persistent risk to the financial market sentiment, with that being that North Korea has some very capable nuclear capabilities, and they have a lot of potential there. So removing this uncertainty and removing those capabilities will be something that investors welcome.
But do you think it was an equal meeting? It seemed as though Donald Trump was saying a lot more than his counterpart. Do you think that Mr. Trump was basically dominating the conversation?
It's a good question. My honest view is that both leaders had a lot to gain from the meeting, and it comes down to legacy. For the North Korean leader, although he will need to give up his nuclear weapons, it seems, which is something that North Korea has as a strength, he has inherited a country that has lived in isolation for a number of decades. And now the North Korean leader, if these sanctions gradually get relaxed, and if North Korea does enter a period of denuclearization, he would potentially be remembered as the leader of North Korea who dragged his country out of this period of isolation. Whereas with President Trump, he, on the other side of the table, could be the one sitting US president who managed to meet the North Korean leader and managed to do something that very many others are not possibly able to do, which is persuade and encourage North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons.
This morning, I keenly woke up wanting to see what was happening. And of course, I saw the statements coming out from Mr. Trump that it was a very, very successful meeting. He likes to say more, very, very, very. And despite that, I looked at the Asian markets and yes, they were positive, but they weren't exactly shooting the lights out. Why was that?
I don't think you're the only one who was waking up and just wondering what exactly was going to happen or what was taking place. Look, everything looks positive, and there was a positive reaction in the market. However, it seems to become more subdued and a bit more muted as the days progressed. I admit to that. What it could be is that the markets were expecting a positive outcome. When you give President Trump's comments over recent days that he was on a mission of peace, and it was a real chance of success, it appears that investors did price in some premium into the markets, that this would be a positive meeting, and it appears so. The reason why perhaps this momentum has become a bit more muted as days progressed is because there's still some uncertainty over what exactly this declaration is that's been signed and how long it might take for the process of complete denuclearization for North Korea.
Now, with the first meet seemingly positive and the basis for more to come, how is it envisaged that the North Korean economy can be liberalized while at the same time going through the process of complete denuclearization, which could take many years? I mean, surely the North Koreans can't wait for 15 years before they get, cut some break in terms of economic sanctions.
It's another good point. Actually, what I would say is we need to remember that North Korea has, by all accounts, lived in isolation. And some living conditions that are a bit sensitive for a number of decades and years. So any improvement from this point is a positive for North Korea. North Korea is highly dependent on its one and only major ally, which is China. So if North Korea is able to open up its markets more internationally or become more, be able to build relations, that's the correct word, with other nations and other major economies, this can only benefit North Korea on a gradual basis. North Korea is going to stand to gain from this a lot, and I think that the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, he's really had an opportunity today to define his own legacy and to provide the basis for a much more prosperous North Korea than it was yesterday, and that what some might have imagined would not be possible. And it's not just North Korea, it includes South Korea as well. If you look at South Korea, it's got a thriving economy with so much potential, but it has been pinned down from this uncertainty over what is happening or what could potentially happen between North and South. In recent weeks, North and South Korea have met and taken steps that some thought would not be possible. So this just goes to show how so many different nations and economies and markets can gain from something like this.
Yeah, now you've highlighted South Korea, of course. It's an obvious geographical kind of neighbor. But what other countries would immediately benefit from this first positive summit? And was any of this borne out in the currencies?
So I would say, look, from the major markets that are quite obvious, I would say it would be the United States, because President Trump headed into a midterm election a couple of months, this is going to be a big win for him. And then there's North Korea for the reasons that we pointed out, and the same with South Korea. The region that North Korea is surrounded in the Southeast Asian region, this is a benefit to them as well. I think Singapore said earlier today that they've hosted this summit and they've invested in this summit because they would like to be remembered as a location where it became a significant landmark for what could potentially to come be world peace. So that goes to show how much people have to gain. A country has to gain from this, not just on an economic standpoint and not from a macroeconomic standpoint either, but just from the legacy that's at play. In currency markets, we can say the region's going to be more positive. So Malaysian ringgit, Indonesian rupiah, Chinese yuan could possibly gain because there's quite a significant reduction of risk. And if investors do become a lot more attracted towards investing in the global stock markets, this could have even more implications on risk appetite, encouraging investors towards risk. So that's why even your higher yielding currencies that appear very isolated and geographically away from North Korea can benefit, such as the South African rand, which is highly reliant on investor appetite towards taking on risk.
Well, we'll come to the South African rand in just a moment. The dollar itself has firmed quite a bit, as you've mentioned. But I wanted to ask, is that a product of, U.S. economic fundamentals and a feeling that more interest rates are coming? We're going to hear from the U.S. Fed, I think, tomorrow. Or has the positive summit also played a role, or the lead up there too?
It's an interesting point, and it's a good question. I could say that it's a mixture of both. For example, from the summit perspective, President Trump's a major winner from here because he's removed some of this ongoing political risk that investors are very uncertain about. But let's not forget the U.S. economic and the fundamentals are still significantly strong. They're actually very impressive when it comes to developed economies. The U.S. market and the U.S. economy itself remains far, far beyond its developed peers, such as Europe and the United Kingdom, as just two examples. We also have a U.S. interest rate decision tomorrow, where the markets largely expect another U.S. interest rate rise, which is once again another reminder to investors that the Federal Reserve and the U.S. economy remains so far beyond its developed peers that gap is just continuing to stretch, and this is positive for the US dollar as well.
Look, all praise to Mr. Trump, for trying to broker peace and all of that. But before his historic meeting today, he obviously, he disgruntled many of his allies at the G7. He refused to sign the joint communique, and he adopted this continued posture of protectionism, America first. And it's interesting that, some are saying that Donald Trump is going all the way out of his way to unsettle his allies on the one hand, and then he's going out of his way on the other hand to make friends with, people who are known to be dictators, who make their, citizens' lives uncomfortable and all of that. Surely what happened at the G7 was a very negative thing for US and its so-called allies' relations.
It certainly is interesting, and it's something that we've come to expect from a very unpredictable U.S. administration and a very unpredictable U.S. president. If somebody would have said a matter of weeks ago that Trump and the North Korean leader would actually meet, there'd be skepticism. If somebody would have said that 6-7 months ago, would have thought it was crazy, but it's happened. We see this from President Trump a lot, a very aggressive and outspoken rhetoric, which can raise eyebrows, and it can cause media headlines, and it can also cause uncertainty and volatility in the markets. However, on a personal level, when it comes to it on the ground, it appears a lot more toned down. This was not a President Trump and North Korean meeting today where both parties were just a few months ago threatening to, potentially blow each other apart. I think Mr. Trump called the North Korean leader Rocket Man at a UN nation summit not that long ago. And when it comes to the G7, certainly something that needs to be listened to, and we cannot ignore these risks over a potential trade war, because this is very unpredictable tactics from President Trump. However, just potentially he has this midterm election in a couple of months' time, and maybe what he is doing is trying to appease to his voter base, where this America first, putting America first and always, and this protectionist nature that he campaigned very hard for, it rallies his supporters. And you can't doubt that.
I hear you. Now, when all is said and done, where does the current world order and the strength of the US dollar leave emerging market currencies like the South African rand?
It's not positive because the US dollar appears very strong at this point. And the outlook is likely that it's going to get stronger for a couple of different reasons. And this resurgence in the dollar that we've seen since April really took investors by surprise. It's caused a lot of damage on the currency markets, where the strength in the dollar, which is around 6%, I think, over the second quarter of 2018, has left a very lasting implications across the globe. I think there's only now 4 or 5 emerging market currencies that have gained against the US dollar this year, while most of the majors are now lower against the dollar. Whereas if you would have said that before April, it was the other way around, where most things were higher against the US dollar. The outlook is that the dollar will continue to strengthen. The US economy is very strong. The US Federal Reserve appears very upbeat and optimistic on the economy. And what is also helping the US dollar at this point is these indications that that very significant economic momentum that we were seeing in economies like Europe last year seems to have peaked somewhat, and it's opening the door to further interest rate differentials for the US dollar. And it's also opening the door for more discussions over how far beyond the US economy is compared to its peers when it comes to recovering from that great global financial crisis, which is all very dollar positive. Unfortunately, it's very negative for emerging market economies, which is why the South African rand has remained under pressure for some time. It's not the only currency that's remained under pressure because, like I said, there's only 4 currencies in the global emerging marketplace that have gained against the US dollar this year. But the outlook is that the dollar will continue to get stronger, which means that we can expect further pressure on the emerging market currencies as well.
So briefly, for the South African economy, we can expect more and more inflation to come?
I believe so. This is because of the negative momentum over the South African rand over the second quarter of the year. At some point, this will weigh into price pressures and would raise inflation projections. It might have some benefits when it comes to exports and external investment, but it does mean that inflation is going to increase. It's not only South Africa that's looking at this prospect. Over the past couple of weeks, India, Indonesia, and Turkey have all needed to raise interest rates, largely because of their currencies being in crisis. and the flattening they're receiving from the dollar strength.
All right.
It is a dollar story, which is causing a lot of turmoil in the emerging markets.
That was Jameel Ahmad. He's from FXTM.